Hello, Algebra 2, Lesson 4-9, Rotations and Perpendicular Lines. The big idea is, if a line has slope m, any line perpendicular to it has slope a negative 1 over m. Okay? So, what that means is, if a line has slope equaling 3/4, then a line perpendicular slope means it has a negative 1 over m, which this is m, 3/4, which means it's equal to a negative 4 over 3. And what you need to remember, that you should remember from algebra and geometry, that when you have slope times a perpendicular slope, they equal a negative 1. And that's how you can tell if your lines are perpendicular to each other or not. So it says, if a rotation of magnitude 90 degrees is applied to a line, then an image line is perpendicular to the pre-image line. This is true regardless of the center of the rotation, and it explains a very nice relationship between the slopes of perpendicular lines. So I'm going to walk you through this activity and show you, and I'm going to take you to the next slide to walk through this activity. But it says, find the slope of the line segment AB, where A is a negative, 3 point, and B is 5, negative 1. So the first thing we need to do is find slope. If you remember, slope is y2 minus y1 all over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So this is x1, y1, this is x2, y2. It's just the first coordinate and the second coordinate that I came into. Okay, so y2 is a negative 1, minus y1 is 3. Make sure you watch your signs. x2 is 5, minus x1 is a negative 8. Okay, so a negative 1 minus 3 is a negative 4, and 5 minus a minus 8, minus a minus is plus, so I get 13. Now you can leave that as a fraction. It's not a big deal. Matter of fact, when you're dealing with stuff like this, you're going to want to leave it as a fraction, because to find the perpendicular slope is very easy when looking at it as a fraction. To find the slope of a line segment A image, B image, after the rotation, or A prime, B prime, at the rotation of 90 degrees, okay, what we need to do is take the rotation of 90 degrees matrix, so this is a rotation of 90 degrees, times my 2 points, A being a negative 8, 3, and B being 5, negative 1. If you remember yesterday, the rotation of 90 degrees is 0, negative 1, 1, 0. Okay? So what this means is the x's and y's flip, and you put a negative on your y's. So this becomes a negative 3, a positive 1. Okay? And my x's stay the same. Negative 8 and 5. Okay? So they want us to find the slope of these 2 points now, which is negative 3, 8, negative 8, and 1, 5. Okay? This is my A prime, B prime. So x1, y1, x2, y2. y2 is 5, minus y1 is a negative 8. Okay. x2 is 1, minus x1 is a negative 3. 5 minus a minus 8 is plus, gives me 13. 1 minus a minus 3 gives me 4. So, as I said before, does a negative 4/13 times 13 fourths equal a negative 1? That's my question. Well, 13's divide out, leaves me with 1. 4's divide out, leaves me with just 1. And a negative times a positive equals a negative 1. So, yes, it checks out. Therefore, those two lines are perpendicular. Do you see why the product of slopes is a negative 1? I sure hope so. The rotation of 90 degrees switches x and y coordinates and changes the first coordinate to its opposite. In the slope formula, this switches the numerator and denominator and multiplies the denominator by a negative 1. So the slope, a over b, becomes a negative b over a. And the product is a negative 1, as I just showed you. Which brings us to this theorem, perpendicular lines and slopes. Two lines with slopes m1 and m2 are perpendicular if and only if, when you multiply them together, they give you a negative 1. And I stated that earlier. Two lines with slopes m1 and m2 are perpendicular if and only if those two slopes multiplied together give you a negative 1. Moving on. Quiz yourself 1. Two perpendicular lines have slopes 1/2 and s. What is s? Well, we know 1/2 times s has to give me a negative 1. Well, what times 1/2 is going to give you a negative 1? Well, you do the reciprocal, so s is going to be 2 over 1, which is just 2. This one's positive, so this has to be negative. So let's check this out. Does 1/2 times 2 equal a negative 1? Well, 1/2 times 2 is 1. Sorry, that should be a negative 2. 1/2 times 2 is 1. A positive times a negative is a negative. So s in this case is going to have to be a negative 2. Example, line N contains 4, negative 3. And it's perpendicular to the line L, whose equation is y equals 2/5 x plus 3. Find an equation for line N. Okay, perfect. The first thing we got to do is find our perpendicular slope. And to find our perpendicular slope, what we have to do is take the slope of this line. So slope of this line is 2/5. 2/5 times some number x, that's what we're trying to get, equals a negative 1 to give us our perpendicular slope. So take the reciprocal, that's 5/2, and multiply it by, well, this is positive, so this has to be negative. So my perpendicular slope is going to be a negative 5/2. Okay? Now, I got slope. I got a point on that line. I could probably use point slope form. If you remember, point slope form is y minus y1, okay, is equal to the slope times x minus x1, where all you need to know is the slope and some point. The point that we know is 4, negative 3. So this is going in for my x1, this is going in for my y1. So putting these in, y minus y1, y1 is a negative 3, equals slope, which is a negative 5/2, times quantity x minus x1 is 4. Okay? Now, you change this to plus, and technically you have an equation. Now, what if you wanted to put it into the same equation as you see right here? Well, all you have to do is solve for y. Okay? So let's solve for y just so you can see that. Okay? I got y plus 3 is equal to a negative 5/2 times x is a negative 5/2 x. A negative 5/2 times a negative 4. Negative times negative is a positive. 2 goes into 4 twice. 5 times 2 is 10. Okay? Check it out on your calculator. I'm sure you'll agree. Or you could say 5 times 4 is 20 divided by 2 is 10, right? Got to solve for y, so I got to subtract 3. I hope I don't have to show you that, but I will. When I subtract 3, those are gone. Equals a negative 5 halves x plus 7. So either one of these I will take, okay? It's just a lot of times, maybe like on your Iowa Test of Basic Skills, you need to put it back into the same equation that they started you with, or that they gave you, okay? Last one, quiz yourself 2. Are the lines with slopes 5 and a negative 0.2 perpendicular? Justify your answer. Well, if they're perpendicular, they equal a negative 1 when multiplied together. So 5, the question is, does 5 times a negative 0.2 equal a negative 1? 5 times a negative 0.2 does equal a negative 1. Therefore, these slopes are perpendicular. That's all I have for you today. Please enjoy. We'll see you tomorrow.